Hey guys, tonight we begin with one of the most misunderstood civilizations in human history, Europe. Sometime before the sun is even considered rising, the air is sharp with cold, and something itchy is nibbling at your ankle. You try to stretch, but your elbow hits a wooden wall that feels damp to the touch. Congratulations, you've officially time-traveled, and you probably won't survive this. The roof above you is thatched, patched with mud and straw, and it leaks whenever it rains, which, in parts of medieval Europe, is often. You're lying on what generously qualifies as a mattress, a sack stuffed with straw, possibly last season's straw, and possibly last season's insects. There is no pillow. There is no memory foam. There is just gravity and regret. Before you get comfortable listening to this, because you are comfortable, wrapped in modern blankets with heating and plumbing. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, tell me your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where in the world you're drifting off from tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You blink into the darkness. It's not just early, it's pitch black. There's no soft bedside lamp, no glowing phone screen. The only light comes from embers in a small central hearth, barely alive under a layer of ash. Smoke from last night still lingers, because your hut doesn't have a proper chimney. Instead, it has a hole in the roof and hope. Historians still argue whether medieval peasant homes were as universally smoky as often portrayed, but excavations across England and northern France show that many early medieval houses lacked chimneys entirely. Smoke simply drifted upward and filtered out through thatch, which means your eyes burn before you've even fully opened them. You sit up slowly, your bones ache. Not metaphorically, literally. The average medieval peasant works physically from childhood, and by the time you reach your 30s, if you reach your 30s, your joints feel like they've been negotiating with gravity for decades. Outside, you hear something shuffle, probably a chicken, possibly a pig. In many peasant homes, animals share the same structure or are kept just beyond a thin wooden partition. It's efficient for warmth. It's less efficient for smell. You inhale cautiously. That was a mistake. There's manure somewhere nearby. There's damp straw. There's unwashed wool. Bathing is not exactly a daily ritual here. Contrary to popular myth, medieval people did bathe. Public bathhouses existed in many towns, but regular hot baths for rural peasants? Rare. Water must be drawn. Firewood must be burned. Time must be spared. And time, as you'll discover, is not something you own. You reach down to scratch your ankle. Something small scurries away. Fleas are common companions in this era. Rats too. In fact, one quirky historical tidbit suggests that some medieval households kept weasels or small ferrets to control rodent populations. Imagine that being your pest control system. You stand, ducking under the low beams. The floor beneath your feet is packed earth. No polished hardwood, no tiles. Just dirt, smoothed by years of footsteps. In wetter seasons, this floor becomes mud. In colder months, it hardens like stone. You're wearing a simple wool tunic, rough against your skin. It's probably the same one you wear most days. Most peasants own very few garments, often just 1 or 2 sets. Laundry is labor-intensive. Soap is basic. Stains are permanent companions. You push open the wooden door. Dawn is barely a grey suggestion on the horizon. The village is quiet except for a distant cough and the creak of wood. There are no paved streets here, just rutted tracks carved by carts and hooves. When it rains, they become rivers of mud. A rooster crows, sounding much too cheerful for the circumstances. Your stomach tightens. You are already hungry. Medieval peasants consume a diet heavily based on bread, coarse, dark bread made from rye or barley. Wheat bread is often reserved for wealthier households. Breakfast, if it exists at all, might be leftover pottage, a stew simmered endlessly in a communal pot, with grains and whatever vegetables are available. Sometimes cabbage, sometimes onions, occasionally a scrap of meat, if fortune smiles. Mainstream historical records from manor accounts show that peasants often owed part of their harvest to their lord as rent or tax, which means what you grow is not fully yours. You survive on what remains after obligation. You step outside and glance toward the fields beyond the village. They stretch wide, divided into strips. This is the open field system, common across medieval Europe. You don't own your land outright. You farm scattered strips assigned to you while common pastures are shared. It sounds cooperative. It feels restrictive. The sky slowly brightens, revealing other figures emerging from huts like yours. Everyone looks tired. Everyone moves with quiet urgency. There's no hitting snooze in 14th century Europe. If you oversleep, crops suffer. If crops suffer, you suffer. And somewhere in the distance, faint but steady, church bells begin to ring. Religion marks time here more than clocks. Mechanical clocks exist in some cities by the late Middle Ages, but for most villagers, the day is divided by light and liturgy. Prime, terce, sext, hours named by prayer, not productivity apps. You rub your hands together for warmth. There are no gloves. Your breath fogs in front of you. It's early autumn perhaps, and already you feel the chill. Winter will be something else entirely, but we'll get there. For now, your task is simple. Survive the morning. You glance back at your hut, your smoky, drafty, insect-friendly hut, and you realize something uncomfortable. You've been awake for maybe 10 minutes, and you're already exhausted. If modern you struggles before coffee, medieval you is negotiating with cold air, hunger, parasites, and a social system that offers little upward mobility. Historians still argue whether the feudal system was as rigid everywhere as textbooks suggest. But mobility for peasants was undeniably limited. You are born into this. You likely die in this. A dog barks somewhere nearby. A cart wheel creaks. Smoke begins rising from other huts as families stir embers back to life. You take one last look at the paling sky. This is your day now. No central heating, no antibiotics, no guaranteed meals, just land, labor, and luck. And it's only just begun. Your stomach growls again, louder this time, as if it understands that medieval mornings do not wait for you to feel ready. You step back inside the hut, ducking beneath the low lintel, and crouch beside the hearth. The embers are still faintly alive, glowing like tired stars beneath grey ash. You kneel and blow gently, coaxing a flicker of flame from what remains of last night's fire. There are no matches. Fire is preserved, guarded carefully, because starting one from scratch with flint and steel is slow, stubborn work. You feed the flame with twigs collected yesterday. Wood is precious. In many regions, peasants have limited rights to gather it. Forests often belong to the Lord, and taking more than you're allowed can mean fines or worse. Historians still argue whether enforcement was consistently harsh or more flexible in rural areas. But the uncertainty alone is enough to keep you cautious. Once the fire catches, you lift a blackened iron pot that hangs over the hearth. Inside is yesterday's pottage, a thick, lumpy stew of barley and whatever vegetables were available. Pottage is less a recipe and more a continuous existence. Ingredients are added when possible, simmered for hours, sometimes days. It is breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It is dependable in a way that variety is not. You stir it slowly with a wooden spoon. The smell is earthy. Cabbage, onion, grain. No salt beyond what you can afford. Salt, though common enough near coastal areas, can be expensive inland. And spices? Forget spices. Pepper exists, yes, imported from distant lands along trade routes that stretch astonishingly far, but it is reserved for the wealthy. Your meal does not travel across oceans. It barely travels across the field. You ladle a portion into a small wooden bowl. No ceramic glaze, no delicate porcelain, just wood, carved by hand, perhaps by someone in your village during the long winter evenings. You sit on a low stool and blow on the steaming surface before taking a cautious bite. It is bland, not offensively so, just quiet, functional, food as fuel, not experience. Bread accompanies the pottage, dark, heavy bread made from rye or barley flour. It's dense enough to feel like you're holding a small brick. In some regions, stale bread even serves as a kind of edible plate called a trencher. After absorbing stew juices, it can be eaten, unless it's set aside for the poor or fed to animals. You chew slowly. Your jaw works harder than you expect. Medieval bread contains bits of grit from millstones, tiny fragments of stone that gradually wear down teeth over years. Archaeological studies of medieval skeletons show significant dental wear, especially among peasants. So if your molars feel slightly abused, that's not your imagination. That's history grinding back. Outside, voices murmur. A neighbor calls to another, discussing livestock. A child cries briefly before being hushed. Children here grow up quickly. There's no long adolescence buffered by schooling and structured hobbies. By the age of 7 or 8, many are already helping in fields or tending animals. You take another bite of pottage and try to imagine explaining cereal to these people. A brightly colored box, promising marshmallows shaped like moons. They would assume you are either royalty or unwell. Milk is scarce unless you own cows or goats, and even then it's often turned into cheese or butter for preservation. Fresh milk spoils quickly. Without refrigeration, timing is everything. Water sits in a clay jug near the hearth. You lift it and drink carefully. Clean water is not guaranteed. Wells can be contaminated. Streams may carry runoff from animals upstream. Beer, surprisingly, is often safer. A weak ale, sometimes called small beer, is commonly consumed by adults and even children because the brewing process kills many harmful organisms. It's low in alcohol, more hydration than intoxication. Mainstream historians note that medieval Europeans likely consumed far less pure water than we do today, relying heavily on ale and diluted wine. You glance at your wooden cup and wonder how your modern self would handle that adjustment. A scratching sound interrupts your thoughts. You glance down to see a cat slink past your feet. Cats are valued here, unofficial guardians against rodents. In some superstitions, they are linked to witchcraft, particularly black cats, but practically speaking, they're helpful allies. You offer it a small scrap of bread. It sniffs, unimpressed. You finish your meal, scraping the bowl clean. There is no food waste culture here. Every crumb matters. Famine is not a distant historical concept. It is a recurring threat. The Great Famine of 1315-1317, for example, devastated parts of Europe when relentless rains destroyed crops. People starved. Some accounts describe desperate measures that historians still debate, including reports of cannibalism, though the extent remains contested. That kind of hunger is only a few failed harvests away. You set your bowl aside and wipe your mouth with the back of your sleeve. Napkins are a luxury. You stand feeling slightly warmer from the fire, but not fully satisfied. Meals here fill the stomach enough to keep moving, not enough to indulge. There's a knock at the door, more a polite thud. Your neighbor peers in, reminding you of today's labor in the Lord's fields, because not all your time belongs to you. Under the feudal system, many peasants owe labor services, known as corvée, working specific days on the Lord's demesne land. Your personal strip must wait. You nod and grab a rough wool cloak. Outside, the village is fully awake now. Smoke curls upward from dozens of huts. The sky has shifted from grey to pale blue. Chickens scatter as you step into the lane. As you walk, you pass a communal oven, a larger stone structure used by villagers who lack their own baking facilities. Sometimes fees are required to use it. Sometimes the Lord owns it and takes a share. Feudalism is less a single rulebook and more a web of obligations. You chew the last bit of bread, swallowing hard. It sits heavy in your stomach. You think about your modern kitchen, refrigeration humming softly, cupboards stocked with choices. Here, choice is narrower. Survival is structured around season, soil, and hierarchy. And you haven't even started working yet. The morning chill still clings to the air. Your breath fogs as you join the others heading toward the open fields. The taste of barley lingers faintly on your tongue. Breakfast is done. Now the real exhaustion begins. The walk to the fields is short, but the world around you feels much older than the years you're used to counting. Mud clings to your boots, if you're lucky enough to have boots. Many peasants wear simple leather shoes or wooden clogs, and in wetter regions, those shoes never fully dry. Dampness becomes a permanent state of being. As you move through the village lane, you catch the scent again. A layered perfume of manure, smoke, wet wool, and humanity. This is not a place that smells like lavender soap and linen spray. It smells alive, intensely alive. Hygiene, as you're beginning to understand, operates on a different rhythm here. Contrary to the popular myth that medieval people never bathed, that simply isn't true. Public bathhouses existed in many European towns, especially during the High Middle Ages. Some cities even regulated them. but rural villages like you don't have easy access to heated communal baths. Water must be drawn from wells or streams. It must be heated over a fire. Firewood must be gathered, legally if possible. And time, always time, must be spared. Historians still argue whether medieval Europeans bathed more frequently than we assume, pointing to written references of washing hands before meals and occasional bathing rituals. But daily hot showers? That's a luxury centuries away. You scratch your forearm. Fleas are persistent companions in this era. They thrive in straw bedding, wool clothing, and the close quarters of shared living spaces. Lice, too, are common enough to inspire small combs specifically designed to remove them. Archaeologists have found fine-toothed lice combs in medieval graves, a tiny but telling reminder that personal grooming did matter, even if conditions made it difficult. You reach up and adjust your wool cap. Your hair hasn't been washed in, well, you're not entirely sure. Maybe rinsed in a stream weeks ago. Soap exists, often made from animal fat and wood ash, but it's coarse and not always reserved for personal use. Laundry and cleaning tools take priority. A woman passes you carrying a wooden bucket. Water sloshes dangerously close to the rim. She's likely drawn it from the village well, which sits at the center of daily life. Wells are communal spaces for gathering water, sharing gossip, and occasionally spreading illness. Water contamination is a quiet danger. Without knowledge of microbes, villagers rely on taste and clarity. If it looks clean, it must be clean. Unfortunately, what you cannot see can still harm you. As you approach the fields, you notice something else. The flies. They hover around livestock, around refuse piles, around anything organic and decomposing. Waste disposal here is pragmatic. Some villages designate specific dumping areas. Others rely on pigs and dogs to consume scraps. In towns and cities, waste is sometimes tossed into streets, a practice that has likely been exaggerated in popular imagination, but did occur. You imagine explaining indoor plumbing to your medieval self. Pipes that carry waste away invisibly. Toilets that flush with a simple lever. Here, relief often means a trip to a shared latrine or a designated corner of the yard. In castles and monasteries, more advanced garderobes exist, vertical shafts built into walls, but in peasant life, simplicity reigns. There's a quirky tidbit scholars sometimes mention. Certain medieval medical texts recommend unusual remedies for skin issues, including ointments made from herbs, animal fats, and occasionally ingredients that would make modern dermatologists faint. Some remedies even included crushed insects. Whether effective or not, they reflect a sincere attempt to understand and manage bodily discomfort. You stop briefly to rub your hands together. Dirt collects beneath your nails. You try to remember the last time you used hand sanitizer. The church plays a role in hygiene too. Cleanliness is often associated with spiritual purity, but modesty also shapes bathing practices. Mixed-gender bathhouses, once common, become controversial in certain periods. Moral concerns rise, regulations tighten, bathing culture shifts. A boy runs past you barefoot, laughing despite the mud splashing his legs. Childhood here is not sanitized. Cuts and scrapes are common. Infection is an ever-present risk. A small wound can become life-threatening without antibiotics. Even something as simple as a toothache can escalate into a serious problem. You touch your jaw instinctively, remembering the gritty bread from earlier. Dental hygiene exists in rudimentary forms. Twigs used as chew sticks, cloth rubbed against teeth. But cavities and abscesses are widespread. Medieval skulls often show signs of severe dental issues. And yet, life goes on. You reach the edge of the open fields, where strips of land stretch outward in uneven ribbons. The soil is dark and cool beneath your boots. A plough rests nearby, simple and heavy, waiting for oxen to drag it forward. The smell of earth is almost comforting, cleaner than the village lane at least. But before you begin working, you notice something else clinging to your sleeve. A flea. You flick it away gently, resisting the urge to wage war on an entire ecosystem. In this world, you are less a master of your environment and more a participant in it. Humans, animals, insects, all sharing space in uneasy balance. Historians still argue whether poor hygiene significantly contributed to the spread of diseases like the Black Death, or whether the primary culprit was the flea-carrying rat itself. The debate continues, but what's clear is this. living in close quarters with animals and parasites, creates vulnerability. You inhale deeply, filling your lungs with cold morning air. It's crisp, almost refreshing compared to the smoky interior of your hut. For a moment, you appreciate the open sky. No fluorescent lights, no humming electronics, just wind moving through distant trees. But the itch returns, persistent and undeniable. You scratch your wrist and realize something quietly unsettling. This, the smells, the insects, the dirt under your nails, is normal here. It's not a temporary inconvenience, it's daily life. And you're only a few hours into it. The sun rises higher, casting pale gold light across the fields. Work awaits. Sweat will mix with dust. Dirt will cling to skin already carrying yesterday's labor. You flex your fingers, preparing to grip the plow. Cleanliness is not your priority. Survival is. You wrap your fingers around the wooden handle of the plow, and immediately you understand something your modern gym membership never prepared you for. This is not a workout. This is existence. The oxen shift impatiently in front of you, their breath steaming in the cool morning air. They are massive, slow, and essential. Without them, turning this heavy soil would take far longer than your back could tolerate. You guide them forward with a quiet command you've learned since childhood, because here, you don't learn algebra, you learn land. The blade cuts into the earth with resistance. Your arms jolt from the vibration, a stone and root interrupt the line. The soil is thick and uneven. Every step forward demands effort. Your boots sink slightly with each push. There is no 8-hour shift. There is no weekend. Work follows the sun. You begin at dawn, and you continue until the light fades or your body forces you to stop. Mainstream historians estimate that medieval peasants worked intensely during peak agricultural seasons, planting and harvest especially, sometimes from sunrise to sunset. However, scholars still argue whether peasants may have had more feast days and religious holidays than we assume, possibly offering brief respites from field labor. But today is not a feast day. You lean your weight into the plow again. The oxen move slowly but steadily. The open field system spreads around you, long strips assigned to different families, no neat fences dividing ownership. It looks communal. It feels controlled. You do not own this land outright. You hold it in tenure from your lord. In exchange, you owe labor days, a portion of crops, and sometimes additional taxes in grain, eggs, or livestock. This system, commonly known as feudalism, varies across Europe, but the core principle remains. Hierarchy defines everything. Your shoulders burn. You pause briefly, wiping sweat from your brow with the back of your sleeve. Dirt smears across your forehead. The sun has risen fully now, warming the chill from earlier. Birds circle overhead, scanning for worms exposed by your work. A neighbor works a strip beside yours. He nods, but doesn't stop. Conversation during heavy labor is limited. Energy must be conserved. Every calorie burn must be justified by survival. You glance toward the manor house in the distance, larger, sturdier, built with timber and perhaps partial stone. Not a grand castle, just a fortified residence. But it represents authority. Justice is dispensed there. Rents are collected there. Decisions that affect your life are made there. Historians still argue whether the relationship between lord and peasant was purely oppressive or more reciprocal in some regions. In certain cases, lords offered protection, legal mediation, and access to mills or ovens. But protection is complicated when you cannot leave without permission. You push forward again. The plough jerks. A stone halts your progress. You kneel and pry it loose with your hands, fingers scraping against sharp edges. There are no gloves. Your palms are already thick with calluses, layers of defense built over years. A bell rings faintly from the village church, marking the next canonical hour. Time here is not measured in minutes, but in light and ritual. You straighten slowly, stretching your back. Already, a dull ache spreads along your spine. Medieval skeletons recovered from burial sites often show signs of arthritis and spinal wear consistent with lifelong manual labor. This is not temporary strain, it's cumulative. A breeze moves across the field, carrying the scent of turned soil. For a moment, it's almost peaceful. There's rhythm in the repetition. Step, push, guide, adjust. But then you remember, this strip isn't the only one. You must also tend your personal plot later, and if today is one of the designated labor days for your lord's demise, Your own crops wait second in line. Delay can mean smaller yields. Smaller yields mean less food through winter. You feel hunger creeping back already. The breakfast was not long ago. Caloric intake here barely matches expenditure during heavy work periods. Meat is rare. Protein is limited. Your muscles draw from reserves that are never fully replenished. A younger boy struggles nearby, attempting to guide a smaller plough. He stumbles, and a tool veers off course. An older man corrects him with quiet firmness. Skills are passed down not through textbooks, but through repetition. You think about modern career changes, switching industries, retraining online. Here, your occupation is inherited, like your eye color. A blacksmith's son often becomes a blacksmith. A peasant's daughter often marries within the village. Social mobility exists, but it's narrow and unpredictable. The oxen slow. You urge them forward gently. Their hides ripple beneath flies. They are patient creatures, enduring their own form of labor without complaint. Sweat trickles down your neck. Your tunic clings uncomfortably to your back. There is no moisture-wicking fabric, just wool heavy and stubborn. At midday you finally pause. Not for leisure, for necessity. You sit on an overturned bucket and pull out a small cloth bundle containing another piece of bread and perhaps a bit of cheese, if fortune smiled earlier in the week. This is lunch. You chew slowly, staring at the horizon. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants actually worked fewer total hours annually than modern workers due to religious holidays and winter downtime. Some economic historians suggest that while peak seasons were brutal, winter could bring slower agricultural rhythms. But winter also brings hunger and cold, so downtime is a relative comfort. You swallow the last bite and stand again. The afternoon stretches ahead, identical in motion but heavier in fatigue. Your arms tremble slightly as you grip the plough once more. There is no applause for this effort, no performance review, no retirement plan waiting decades later. There is just soil. You guide the oxen forward again, carving another long line through earth that will, hopefully, reward you months from now. And somewhere in the back of your mind, modern you whispers something uncomfortable. You complain about desk jobs. But here, your entire body is the desk, and it is already protesting. By mid-afternoon, your muscles no longer protest loudly. They hum instead, a steady, exhausted vibration that settles into your bones. The sun has climbed high and begun its slow descent, and you are still in the fields. But something else presses on you now, heavier than the plough handle in your grip. Obligation, because the land beneath your feet is not simply soil. It is contract. It is hierarchy, written into furrows. You straighten and glance again toward the manor house in the distance. It doesn't loom dramatically like a fairy tale castle, but it doesn't need to. Its presence is understood. The lord who resides there controls not only land, but justice, mills, ovens, forests, and sometimes even marriages. Under the feudal system, which historians still argue was less a uniform system and more a patchwork of local customs, you hold your land in exchange for service. Labor days on the lord's demesne, a portion of your harvest. Additional dues during special occasions. If the lord's daughter marries, you may owe a gift. If his son becomes a knight, you may owe another. There's even a fine in some regions if you wish to marry someone from another manor. Freedom exists, but it is conditional. You lean the plough aside as a steward approaches, a man appointed to oversee the estate's daily operations. He carries a small ledger. Literacy is not widespread among peasants, but within the church and administrative roles, reading and writing are powerful tools. Ink and parchment are authority made visible. He reminds you of next week's obligation, 2 full days repairing fencing near the western pasture. Your own strip will wait. You nod, because nodding is easier than arguing. Mainstream historical records from manor rolls show detailed accounts of peasant duties, from ploughing and harvesting to maintaining roads and bridges. This system, called manorialism, ties your labor directly to survival and social order. You return to work, but your mind drifts. You think about taxes, not the modern kind deducted invisibly from paychecks, but tangible portions of grain measured and taken. The ties to the church, typically 1/10 of your produce, rent to the lord, perhaps fees for using the mill to grind your grain, because the mill is often his property. You cannot legally grind your own grain with a private hand mill if regulations forbid it. If caught bypassing the Lord's mill, fines follow. The sound of grinding stones is not just agricultural, it is economic control. Historians still argue whether peasants experienced this system as crushing oppression or simply as the natural order of things. Perspective matters. If you've never known another structure, hierarchy feels like gravity. Unavoidable, invisible, assumed. A bell rings again in the distance, faint but persistent. The church marks not only prayer but legitimacy. Kings rule by divine right. Lords govern by inherited authority. Even your suffering fits into a larger spiritual narrative. You wipe sweat from your brow and think about legal recourse. If your neighbor steals a chicken, the manor court handles it. Minor disputes are settled locally. More serious crimes may escalate. Justice is swift, often public, and rarely nuanced. There's a quirky detail medieval legal historians sometimes mention: trial by ordeal. Though less common by the later Middle Ages, earlier centuries saw accused individuals subjected to tests, holding hot iron or being submerged in water, under the belief that God would reveal innocence through survival. Whether these were as frequent as legend suggests remains debated, but the idea alone is enough to make your modern brain twitch. You bend again, adjusting the plow's depth. Soil clumps cling stubbornly to the blade. You realize something subtle: you are never entirely alone here. Even in a field, even in silence, your life is woven into obligation. Every harvest, every animal birth, every marriage must be acknowledged within the manor's structure. Mobility is limited. In some regions, serfs, unfree peasants bound to land, require permission to leave. Others, known as villeins or free tenants, possess slightly more autonomy but still operate within tight boundaries. Historians still argue about the precise distinctions between these statuses across Europe, but the theme remains constant. Upward mobility is rare and slow. A shadow passes overhead, a hawk circling lazily. You watch it briefly, envying its freedom. No steward tracks its movements. No tithe follows its hunt. The oxen snort, impatient. You resume guiding them. As afternoon light softens, the reality settles deeper. Even if you somehow produce a generous harvest, even if weather cooperates, even if illness spares your family, a portion of your success is already spoken for. You think about modern concepts of ownership: deeds, bank accounts, investments. Here, wealth is grain in a sack, livestock in a pen, tools that do not break, and even those can vanish with a single bad season. A distant cart rattles along the lane, likely carrying collected dues towards storage barns. Grain today, wool next month. Chickens before winter. You push forward one more furrow. Your hands tremble slightly from fatigue, but you keep moving because stopping doesn't remove obligation, it only delays it. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the field. Work will end soon, not because you are done, but because darkness enforces pause. As you guide the oxen back toward the village, shoulders aching, you understand something clearly now. You do not simply work to live. You work to belong, to remain permitted, to stay. And even after a full day of labor, your debt to the system continues quietly in the background, like a low hum you can never fully silence. You glance once more at the manor house, its outline steady against the fading sky. Tomorrow, you will wake again before dawn, and the hierarchy will still be there. By the time you trudge back toward the village, the sky has softened into a pale wash of gold and blue. Your shoulders ache in that deep, satisfying but not really way, and your palms feel permanently shaped to the plow handle. But there's one small comfort waiting at the edge of exhaustion: market day. Not every day is market day, of course. In many medieval villages, markets are weekly events, sometimes granted by royal charter. Larger towns host them more frequently. Today, your nearby town is alive with cautious energy, and even in your fatigue, curiosity nudges you forward. You follow the rutted lane toward a cluster of timber-framed buildings gathered around an open square. The smell shifts here. Less manure, more bread baking somewhere nearby. Smoke rises in thin spirals. Voices overlap in a low hum of bargaining. Markets are the medieval internet. Information, goods, gossip, all exchanged face to face. Stalls line the square. Rough wooden tables display onions, cabbages, dried beans. A butcher stands behind, hanging cuts of meat. though most of it is already claimed by those who can afford it. Fresh meat for peasants is rare outside feast days. More common are salted or smoked scraps, preserved carefully for winter. You reach into a small leather pouch at your belt. Inside, a few coins clink softly. Coinage exists, yes, silver pennies circulate widely in parts of Europe, but many rural transactions still rely on barter. Eggs for cloth repair, grain for tools, labor for livestock access. Mainstream historians note that by the High Middle Ages, Europe saw increasing monetization, especially in towns, but rural areas often blended coin and barter seamlessly. It's an economy built on trust, proximity, and necessity. You approach a baker's stall. Round loaves sit stacked neatly, lighter in color than your dark rye bread. Wheat flour, finer texture, higher price. You hesitate. The baker catches your look and offers a half smile. Wheat bread signals status. Even a small piece feels indulgent. You trade 2 eggs and a small coin for a modest loaf. It's warm in your hands, and for a moment, the day's exhaustion fades slightly. Across the square, a cloth merchant displays dyed fabrics, muted blues and reds, achieved through plant-based dyes like woad and madder. Bright colors are expensive. Vibrant scarlet often requires imported materials. You run your fingers over rough wool, imagining something softer. It remains imagination. A blacksmith's hammer rings rhythmically nearby. Tools are precious. A broken hoe or cracked plow blade can disrupt survival entirely. Metalworking is skilled labor, and blacksmiths often hold respected positions within the village hierarchy. Historians still argue about the degree of economic mobility markets allowed. Did trade genuinely offer peasants opportunity to improve their status, or did it mostly reinforce existing structures? The answer varies by region and century. But markets undeniably introduced movement, goods traveling farther than the people who used them. You spot a traveling peddler setting up a small display of trinkets, beads, simple combs, perhaps even a small mirror backed with polished metal. Luxury in miniature. You consider it briefly, then think of winter coming. A group gathers near the edge of the square where a man stands on an overturned barrel, speaking animatedly. He shares news from another town, rumors of political tension, a distant lord feuding with another. News spreads orally here, shaped slightly differently each time it's told. There's a quirky medieval tidbit you might appreciate. Some towns employed official town criers, whose job was to announce proclamations loudly in public squares. Literacy rates being limited, spoken word carries power, memory becomes archive. You take a bite of the wheat bread. It's softer, lighter, almost sweet compared to your usual loaf. The texture feels like a small miracle. You chew slowly, savoring the contrast. Nearby, a money changer sits behind a small table, weighing coins carefully, tipping. Shaving tiny bits of silver from coins is a real problem in this era. Coins are valued by weight as much as imprint. Fraud exists here too, just less digitized. A woman argues over the price of cheese. Voices rise, then settle. Negotiation is expected. Fixed pricing is not yet universal. Everything is relational. You glance toward the edge of the square where a tax collector stands quietly observing transactions. Because even here, even in this burst of trade and choice, obligation follows. Certain goods may be taxed. Certain stalls may pay for the right to operate. Historians still argue about how heavily markets were regulated in different regions. Some lords encouraged trade, recognizing its economic benefits. Others restricted it to maintain control. A child darts between stalls, laughing, clutching a small apple. Apples are seasonal treasures. You smile despite yourself. For a moment, the village feels almost lively. Not just survival, but exchange. Color. Sound. But beneath it all lies fragility. A poor harvest disrupts supply. War disrupts trade routes. Disease empties stalls. You finish the wheat bread and tuck the remaining half carefully into your pouch. It will be shared later. Nothing here is consumed casually. As the sun lowers further, merchants begin packing away goods. Unsold produce returns to carts. Animals are led home. The hum fades into a softer murmur. You turn back toward your hut, muscles protesting again as adrenaline from the market excitement fades. The brief illusion of abundance dissolves into the familiar rhythm of necessity. Markets offer choice, but within limits. You walk the rutted path home, couch lighter, mind heavier, with the awareness that even here, in the busiest corner of your medieval world, survival remains carefully balanced. And tomorrow, the fields will not care how good that wilt bread tasted. By the time you return from the market, the light has begun to thin into evening. A cooler air settles over the village, and with it comes a different kind of presence. Quieter, heavier, harder to see, but impossible to ignore. The church bell rings again. It's not loud from here, but it doesn't need to be. Its sound carries through timber walls, across fields, into habits and fears and hopes. In medieval Europe, the church is not simply a building at the edge of town. It is structure, it is explanation, it is timekeeper, lawgiver, comforter, and sometimes enforcer. You turn toward the small stone church near the center of the village. Compared to your hut, it looks solid, almost eternal. Thick walls, narrow windows, a wooden door reinforced with iron straps. Inside, candles flicker before painted icons and carved saints. You step in quietly. The air smells of wax and cool stone. A priest stands near the altar, speaking softly in Latin, a language you likely do not fully understand. Most peasants don't. Yet the rhythm of the words is familiar, repeated weekly, daily, sometimes. Mainstream historians emphasize that religion permeated every aspect of medieval life. From birth to death, sacraments marked your existence. Baptism welcomed you, marriage sanctified you. Last rites prepared you for the end. You kneel on the hard floor. There are no padded pews. Your knees press against stone worn smooth by generations before you. You think about sin, because sin here is not abstract. It's tangible, immediate. A failed harvest might be punishment. A sickness might be divine testing. A storm might be judgment. God explains what science has not yet named. Historians still argue whether medieval people lived in constant fear of damnation or whether faith provided genuine comfort and stability. Likely both. The church offers structure in a world where uncertainty is constant. Candles flicker along the walls, casting long shadows that dance with each movement of air. A painted image of a saint watches from above, serene, distant. Saints serve as intercessors, approachable figures between humanity and the divine. You might pray to Saint Isidore for good harvests, or Saint Roche for protection from plague. A quirky but fascinating detail, medieval relics, objects believed to be connected to saints, are treasured deeply. Bones, fragments of cloth, even vials of what is claimed to be holy blood. Pilgrims travel miles, sometimes hundreds of miles, to visit shrines. Entire towns flourish around these holy sites. You close your eyes briefly. Outside the church, the world is harsh. Inside, it feels ordered, structured. There is an answer for suffering here, even if it doesn't always change your circumstances. The priest finishes speaking and begins announcements. In the local tongue this time. A reminder of an upcoming feast day. A warning about wolves spotted near the forest edge, and a note about tithes. That 1/10 portion of produce owed to the church. You shift slightly. The tithe is expected. Grain, eggs, sometimes livestock. It supports clergy, church maintenance, and in theory, charity for the poor. Historians still debate how equitably tithes were redistributed, but for you, it's another portion spoken for before winter arrives. A woman nearby whispers a prayer, fingers moving over wooden prayer beads. The repetition is soothing, structured devotion in a chaotic world. Outside, the sky darkens further. You step back out into the cool evening air. The church door closes behind you with a soft thud. Religion doesn't end at the doorway. It follows you home. You cross yourself instinctively before eating. You mutter brief prayers before sleeping. You avoid working on Sundays, mostly, because the church forbids it, though urgent tasks sometimes blur the rule. There's also fear woven into this faith. Whispers of heresy circulate occasionally. Those who challenge doctrine risk severe punishment. In later centuries, inquisitions formalized such investigations. Even now, deviation from accepted belief can isolate you socially. A distant howl breaks your thoughts. Perhaps a dog, perhaps something wilder. You glance toward the forest beyond the fields. Forests are liminal spaces in medieval imagination. Places of danger, spirits, outlaws. Folklore blends with theology. Fairies and demons coexist in whispered stories. historians still argue how literally such beliefs were held versus symbolically understood, but the boundaries between natural and supernatural feel thinner here. You walk back toward your hut, the village quieter now. Smoke rises gently from rooftops as evening meals are prepared. The wheat bread you bought earlier waits in your pouch, a small luxury in a world structured by duty. As you enter your home, you pause briefly at the doorway, looking back at the church silhouette against the dim sky. It stands firm, even as your hut leans slightly to one side. Faith here is both anchor and explanation. It gives shape to suffering, meaning to labor, hope to exhaustion. But it also reinforces order. You sit beside the hearth, breaking the wheat bread carefully to share with your family. The taste is still soft, still slightly sweet. A final bell rings in the distance, marking the close of day. You bow your head briefly, not just out of habit, but because in this world, belief is not optional background noise. It is the air you breathe, and tomorrow before the sun rises again, it will be there, steady, unyielding, comforting, and demanding all at once.